Hey, so are we ready to start or? Okay. Well, thank you everyone for attending this hybrid webinar. So we are in person and virtual. This webinar is presented by the Counseling Center. My name is Seth Savoy. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a doctoral psychology intern at the Counseling Center. I was given free range on a topic to present on. And what better topic if not test anxiety for college students, right? So I'll be going over some general techniques for identifying, managing, and succeeding through test anxiety today. This is not a, all-inclusive, information session on test anxiety. There's lots of information I wasn't able to include. If you have any questions along the way, please put your questions in the Q&A chat box. And then somebody will let me know if you have a question. I do hope to make this presentation interactive in some ways. So those of you here in person, you'll be snacking. So feel free to, snack, but also let me know if you have questions. And if you want to participate as much as you want, I would appreciate that. And that goes for everyone who's virtual as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, my clicker is. Okay, so first, just kind of going over some general objectives. So my goal for everyone at the completion of this webinar is to understand what test anxiety is, generally speaking. To understand the impact of test anxiety on things like test performance, mental health, and also to know practical skills for managing and reducing test anxiety. And these skills will benefit you forever. Okay, so I thought I would start this presentation off with a quote from a psychologist who studied test anxiety in the 1950s and beyond. And he said, we live in a test conscious, test giving culture in which the lives of people are in part determined by their test performance. Let me see here, let me move my screen. And I want you to kind of reflect on this quote here. So, and think about the ways that our culture, really relies on tests, kind of reinforces the use of tests, and how important they are in our daily lives and, different decisions that are made for us, about us. So tests are used to assess ability and performance, and this begins early in elementary school. Okay, so we just learning to talk and make friends, and we're already being tested. Okay, that's the reality that we're faced with. And tests are used for gatekeeping and decision-making in a variety of settings and fields. So some of the examples I wanted to put that we might not think about are driving tests, right? So you can't actually get a driver's license and operate vehicles legally without taking a driving test, right? Some other examples are professional licensure tests, if you want to do things like practice in health fields. But also, most importantly for everyone attending today likely, is determining academic performance, right? Being evaluated through these tests and ultimately provided a degree based on your performance on examinations. Can anyone think of any other ways that we use tests, how they come up in our lives? Anybody want to share?
I don't know why I'm thinking about BuzzFeed quizzes.
Okay, so yeah, good. So we might actually test ourselves, right? To get information about ourselves. BuzzFeed quizzes, that's pretty good. Personality tests. We do a lot of that in psychology, right? To kind of, yeah. I was thinking of pilot license, right? That's a really strict field. There's lots of tests and requirements.
Or recruitment to the military.
Yeah, kind of filtering where people will go, right? Based on their strengths. So we use tests a lot in modern society. So is it any surprise to anyone that we get anxious about tests? Like, is that is that a surprise? No, not if you showed up today, huh? So no, it's not really a surprise, right? Because these tests are so important and come up in so many areas of our life, beginning in early childhood and throughout our lives, it can come with some nervousness at the very least, right? Because there's really important consequences to how we perform on these tests and examinations. So test anxiety is a specific type of anxiety. It's a feeling someone might have in a situation where their performance really counts, right? When it's important that you do well, whether that's important to you or important for some decision that's about to happen for you, right? Based on the results. It's also one of the most researched types of anxiety since the 1950s. Is anybody surprised by that? No, right? Because that's how important tests are in our society, that people notice like, oh, wow, people would get really anxious and that impacts their performance. So lots of research has gone into better understanding test anxiety, understanding the symptoms, how it gets in the way, what correlates with test anxiety, and also how to treat it, how to help yourself. And we'll be focusing a lot on understanding test anxiety and also better understanding how you can help yourself. That's my main goal in this webinar today. Okay, so let's talk about some of the cognitive symptoms. So when I'm mentioning cognitive symptoms, these are things that go on in your mind, okay? When it comes to test anxiety and what it looks like. So one thing we're really good at as humans is worrying, okay? We like to worry. It's natural, it's a normal part of life. It's our way of problem solving, right? It's how we have these huge societies with all these buildings that are really tall and they don't fall on us usually, right? Because we predict, okay, what could happen here that could go wrong, right? And then with that worry, we're able to put that into taking action, to preventative action, essentially. So worry serves a purpose for us as an intelligent species, okay? But when it comes to tests, those worries come up as well, right? What if I don't do well? What if I fail? What does that lead to for me in my life, okay? And this can lead to anxious thoughts specifically about tests. And then if your mind is full of all of this worry and racing thoughts and you're worrying about the future and the impact of these tests, this can lead to difficulty concentrating, right? Whether that be before a test, while you're studying, or during the exam, right? You might have trouble concentrating and organizing your thoughts. It can also lead to difficulty recalling information and poor comprehension. So the poor comprehension part is especially important for when you're in classes. If you're sitting there worrying about, am I understanding this information? Oh no, this seems really difficult. Am I going to pass this test coming up? While you're doing that, that's actually a really big distraction going on in your mind and getting in the way from you comprehending the material. Another thing that happens in our minds is negative self-talk. And this is when we take our thoughts and make it personal, okay? So this is when we say pretty mean things about ourselves, like, oh, you can't do this, right? You're not smart enough. That's a common one. You're an imposter, right? That negative self-talk also happens in our mind, and that's a part of test anxiety. It can be. You might also compare yourself to others when you get scores, right? Somebody might do really well in comparison to you, and you might make that personal. Assign some kind of label to yourself based on what that means. And then you might ruminate about past performance. This also happens in your mind, where you worry about a test you failed 5 years ago. And we'll talk about how that can be problematic because meanwhile, you're ignoring all the tests you did well at, right? So we're really good at pointing out the things we struggle with, even if it only happens a couple times, because that's how important it is. So let's talk about some of the emotional symptoms. So this is pretty complex stuff that I've simplified. It's not exhaustive. So I broke emotions down into feelings and mood. And then also our physical reactions that come up when we experience certain emotions related to test anxiety. So you might be thinking that, test anxiety, okay, the emotion is anxiety. Yes, it definitely can be. But some of the emotions that might spin off of our experience of test anxiety include anger, right? You might get really mad or frustrated and irritable about your performance on a test. Hopelessness, sadness, shame, right? Depending on how important that test is to you. And dread and frustration, okay? And then you also have this physical, what I call a uh-oh response, okay? And this is when your body is reacting to anxiety. This is your body's physical reaction to anxiety. So, uh-oh, something scary is going on, okay? And this includes the fight or flight response, which a lot of people have likely heard of. More specifically, it includes panic symptoms that can happen before, during, or after an exam. So heart racing, right? Your blood pressure is higher, changes in your breathing, muscle tension, your shoulders might get really tight during exams or while you're studying because you're, worrying and that's affecting your body because it's, a scare response, it's fear. Sweating, stomach aches, dry mouth, feeling hot, shaky in your body. These are some pretty strong emotions to feel in your body. Some pretty strong reactions that are uncomfortable at times, right? So let's talk about behavioral symptoms. These aren't so obvious sometimes, but if you're anxious about tests, I want you to think of how you react behaviorally. And behaviorally is anything you have the urge to do or you actually do, okay? So some people might avoid tests. Why would I take that test if I'm so anxious about it? Let me just avoid it, right? You might engage in escape behaviors like leaving exams early if your physical symptoms of test anxiety are so high and you're having such a hard time focusing and managing. So you might just leave the room early. And then one of the biggest ones that I see in my work with students is procrastination, okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about procrastination, but avoiding studying, right? Because you have this fear of failure, thinking about that makes you uncomfortable. Well, I don't have to think about it if I don't study, right? But then in the end, that leads to you being even more anxious because now guess what? It's panic study time, okay? And now you have less time to be successful and like build yourself up to understand the material. And then also over preparing, which isn't so obvious sometimes, but for people with high test anxiety, their approach might be to over prepare to the point where they're doing a lot of rehearsing of the material, but it's not really sticking because they're not managing the anxiety. So they're this part of their brain in the front isn't working as efficient, okay? And then social withdrawal, you might avoid friends, avoid talking to people around tests and those types of things. Changes in self-care, that's pretty obvious when it comes to finals times, right? People start chugging energy drinks and not really eating too healthy. One thing I want to mention is substance abuse can happen with test anxiety. So abusing things like alcohol, marijuana, over-the-counter medications like Benadryl, that actually can happen because people are trying to manage the anxiety, the physical anxiety, right? Or the cognitive anxiety without getting to the root of it, okay? And really building up skills to help themselves. So don't recommend, 0 out of 10, don't do that. Let's see here. So let's talk about what the data says. So the data says that the prevalence of test anxiety, just in general, just any level of test anxiety is between 13.3% and 71%. We can get into why that's such a big range, but that's it for another class, another time, y'all take a stats class. But essentially it's very common to experience some degree of test anxiety. Previous research suggests that 10 to 35% of college students experience functionally impairing level of test anxiety. So this is when test anxiety gets in the way, either in their personal life somehow, by interrupting sleep, interrupting their social health, or interrupting their performance on tests, okay? So 10 to 35%, okay? So next time you're feeling, wow, nobody else feels this way, this is just me struggling, likely not true, okay? Likely not true. And of course, one of the biggest concerns for most people is that this test anxiety can get in the way. It can lead to low performance, right? If I can't focus during tests, I'm having all these physical symptoms come up that can be hard to manage. Now, let's take a step back though, Let's talk about how some anxious arousal is actually needed to perform well, okay? So a lot of students might have this goal of, I don't want to be anxious ever again. I just want to cut anxiety out of my life. Let's talk about that. Okay, so here is the Yerkes-Dodson Law of 1908, and this is essentially a theory that explains like performance and arousal, the relationship between those two, okay? And what I've circled in yellow here on the graph is essentially saying that if you're not aroused enough, okay, your performance is actually going to be weak on whatever task at hand, okay? So let's use tests as the example. So what does that look like when you're not aroused enough? Does anybody have a comment, an example? What does it look like for you when you're not aroused enough? Yeah, you don't care, right? You just don't care, like, oh, I'm not worried about this, right? So when we say things like, I'm not worried about this, there's a reason why we say that. It's not important to us, right? So we need some worry in order for it to be important. Do you see that? Okay, good. Or you're just bored, right? You just don't care. I don't care about this task. And then next on the graph is our optimal arousal and optimal performance. This is unique to each person typically. You need some anxious arousal. You need to care somewhat, right? For you to have that perfect spot performance-wise, okay? But if you have too much arousal, this is what happened. I put whoops, right? I've experienced this so many times, y'all don't understand. Where it kind of gets in the way. Now your performance is actually weak because you're too aroused, okay? So the message I really want to communicate here is find that perfect balance for you. Think about it that way. The goal is not to cut anxiety out, okay? We good back there? Let's see. Okay, so I'm gonna cover 4 areas. So 1 is understanding your reaction to test anxiety. 2 is disrupting cycles of unhelpful thinking and worry. 3 is improving your coping skills for managing emotions, especially those physical symptoms. And then 4, I'm gonna go over some just general information on healthy strategies you can engage in before and after exams, okay? So let's start with understanding your reaction. So this is a worry chain, which we've all probably experienced in some way or some form. The example I provided here says, it shows a thought that someone might initially have. This is the thought that triggers the cycle of worry and kind of in your mind and your thoughts are racing, okay? So the thought is the information in class is new and unfamiliar, right? Like, uh-oh, I don't know this, right? And that leads to a thought of, what if I don't comprehend it, the information, right? And then that leads to a thought of, maybe I won't do well on my exam, right? The exam is like 3 months away, but like we're already thinking about it, we're worrying about it, right? What if I fail my class? Okay, now we're really catastrophizing things, okay? We're already predicting failure. And then imagining yourself, right, vividly of what you're gonna have to do if that happens, such as arguing your case to your professor. Has anybody ever experienced kind of a cycle of worry like this? Yeah, I would be surprised if you said no. It's very common. Thanks. They don't know what we're doing virtually. I'm moving things around on the screen. Okay. So step 1, understanding your reaction. Let's talk about how those thoughts, when we get stuck in those cycles of worry and that worry chain, okay, how that impacts the way we feel and the way we behave, how it motivates us to do different things like escape, avoid, right? So how we think, okay, which is worry, but also self-talk, how we talk to ourselves around this testing situations, influences how we feel, and then those emotions subsequently influence how we behave. Okay, that is the main point here. And this model here is called the cognitive mediational model. And this explains any kind of reaction we have to any situation, but we're going to use test situation as our example, okay? So let's say you're faced with a chemistry final exam. I picked chemistry. I've never actually taken a chemistry course, But I've heard that it can be very difficult, okay? So what kind of thoughts do you think people have when it comes to chemistry final exam?
A nightmare.
Did you?
Yes, about chemistry.
Uh-huh.
specific. No, yeah, I thought I was gonna fail. I thought I wasn't gonna remember anything.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm gonna do terrible. I'm gonna fail. I can't do this. What if my parents are disappointed? Now we're bringing family disappointment into this, right? Our minds will do this. Why? What did I say earlier about worry? Why do we worry?
Because we want to do that.
We want to do good because it's important, right? It's important to us. It's important to our families, right? There's meaning in our performance, right? That's a lot of pressure. So if we focus on this kind of thinking, let's imagine what kind of emotions might pop up. Okay. Anxiety, right? Do these emotions equal these kind of thoughts? Does it make sense? So anxiousness, feeling discouraged, having those physical reactions, sweating, increased heart rate, blood pressure. Now you can't focus, right? I don't think anybody's surprised by that. So then those thoughts and those emotions lead to certain behavioral decisions that we make consciously or unconsciously, okay? We don't do this on purpose. We don't have these thoughts on purpose either, right? These are things that happen. So this leads to procrastinating, avoid studying. Why would I study if I'm feeling anxious, discouraged, physical reactions, right? I don't want to feel that. That's uncomfortable. So this leads to that avoidance. Let's talk about what happens next when you procrastinate due to avoiding anxiety. This is round 2, right? Chemistry final exam is now tomorrow. How much did you study if you procrastinated? What do you think on average? Might have opened a book a couple of times, right? Talked about the test to someone, but you actually didn't study. Now you're thinking, I should have studied more, right? Now I'm definitely gonna fail. Not only is it a prediction of failure, but this is like, oh, this is happening, right? Why am I like this? That one hits me, right? Why are you making it personal, right? Now you're making it personal, that this is a character flaw, right? How does that make you feel? Round 2 here. More anxious, more discouraged, hopeless even, right? Those physical reactions, guess how they're gonna be on during that test, even before it, heightened, right? And behaviorally, this is what tends to happen when it comes to procrastinating due to avoiding anxiety. Panic studying, right? You're pulling all-nighters, you're not sleeping, or you even awake during the test at that point. You're chugging energy drinks, right? You're really trying your best. And it seems silly, and I'm giggling about it now, but we don't do these things on purpose, right? This is a lot of times an unconscious reaction we have in our engagement with testing situations, okay? So noticing how you react to those situations is important. Then you can, well, let me back up. This is a vicious cycle, okay? This is, once you get a habit of responding to testing situations and test anxiety this way, it happens again next time you're faced with a really important test, right? This will be your typical response to it, okay? And that's why I call it a vicious cycle. Some of the consequences of that, now your anxiety grows even higher when you're faced with important tests, right? You're even more worried, your performance is affected. So let's talk about disrupting that cycle, okay? And this is where change can happen by you helping yourself change that cycle, how you're thinking about tests, okay? So the goal here is to disrupt the worry chain when it happens. So first step, notice what your worry chains usually look like and then disrupt it by doing a few things. So one thing you can do is recognize thinking traps. These are traps we fall into that we can categorize our worrisome thoughts into, okay? So think of catastrophizing, right? What's a catastrophizing thought about a test that people probably commonly have? Can anyone think of an example?
Like if I fail this, I'm gonna fail my whole program. Like,
Yes.
The end of it.
Good, yes. So one test, right? One test, you're thinking, if I fail this, I'm gonna fail my whole program. I'm gonna have to drop out of college, right? I will tell you, a lot of people have failed exams and still get their degrees, okay? But that's not what we're thinking in that moment. We're thinking of the worst possible outcome, right? So it's important to recognize thinking traps like that. Fortune telling is very similar to the example you provided. So already predicting that the worst is going to happen. I don't know about y'all, but I can't tell the future. Can y'all? Right? Can anybody? That is a gift if you can. Okay. It's not mine though. It's not my gift. Disqualifying the positive and negatively filtering. This is what I was mentioning earlier. So having thoughts like, oh, I failed that one test 2 years ago, right? We start thinking about moments where we actually did fail to prove to ourselves in a way that, oh yeah, I should be very, very worried and anxious here because I'm probably going to fail again. Meanwhile, you're disqualifying the fact that you actually passed about, 100 tests in between then, okay? So that's the first step. Recognize and categorize those thoughts in the thinking traps. You can do this by writing them down, and then engage in challenging them. Okay. And some example questions to ask yourself about these thoughts. Is this thinking helpful or fair? Right? What's the evidence that this thought is 100% true? Like I will fail my test. Is this realistic thinking? What's the reality here? Am I going to drop out of my program or be kicked out of my program if I fail one exam? Right? And then once you challenge it, replace it with an alternative thought that is much more helpful. Okay. Remember, thoughts in a way create feelings that we have. So that anxiety, that physical reaction, how you replace it and find that alternative can really make a difference on how you feel about testing situations. One way to do that is to ask yourself, what would a friend or loved one say to me about this thought? Right? We tend to be a lot harder on ourselves than a good friend that we appreciate would be on us, right? What would be a helpful and fair way to think about this? Okay. And how can I encourage and support myself? Be your biggest cheerleader. Okay. So here's a thought challenging exercise I want everyone to try out, both here in person and virtual. I want you to identify a situation and worry. This can be a worry you've had recently about a class or an exam that kind of keeps popping up and, causing little feelings of anxiety to pop up, right? Getting in the way of you studying maybe. I want you to identify what that thought is and write it down, either in your phone or on paper. And then give me a thumbs up when you have that thought identified. Okay. Thumbs up. Anybody want to share a thought that comes to mind, a worry related to class or exam?
As a dancer,
Okay.
there's auditions, so that's something that brings a lot of anxiety. So when I go to an audition, it's like, okay, what are they gonna think of me? I'm putting myself on the table. Because
Yes.
this is my body, my performance.
Mhm.
So that's the first thing to think about.
Okay, and what's the thought specifically that you think triggers anxiety for you?
Am I good enough?
Am I good enough? Right? Am I good enough? What if I'm not good enough? Right? How is this thought wrong, missing data, assuming the worst, catastrophizing, predicting the future in a negative and unhelpful way? Which one of those things you think relate to a thought like, I'm not good enough? Catastrophizing? Yeah. Yeah. So this is a thinking trap, right? What's a more reasonable interpretation or expectation to replace that thought with? Any examples? How would you help a person having a thought like that? How would you help them reframe this thinking that they're not good enough?
you are good enough, and even if the test doesn't go as predicted, or in my case, like an audition,
Mhm.
it's not the end of the world. I mean, there's more auditions, or maybe when this wasn't the right fit for you.
Good.
And going back to my experience too, the thought of I'm not good enough. Like, well, you've had training,
Mhm.
you put in the work.
Good. So you're looking at what the evidence is, right? The evidence suggests that you've done this before. You have skills in your backpack, right? That you can take out and use when you need them. That's the evidence. That's a more reasonable interpretation, right? So how does this new thought make you feel different or more motivated to study or practice, right? Think about how these thoughts actually make us feel and want to behave in certain ways. So when you replace them, doesn't mean that that anxious thought might not pop back up again, but now you have a thought to counteract it with, okay? That can reduce some of that anxiety that focusing on that anxious, unhelpful thinking trap thought brings up, okay? Any questions? Okay. Moving on. Here's an alternative. So if you don't feel like sitting down and challenging thoughts, which I highly recommend at least do for really important things that bring lots of anxiety, you can notice thinking and create distance from it. And one really cool thing we're able to do is use our imagination as humans, right? So this is leaves on a stream. This is typically done as a meditation, but with enough practice, you can kind of do it in the moment. Once you notice you're having some unhelpful thoughts. So the first step is to close your eyes, and we can all do this very briefly, right? Close your eyes. Step 2, visualize a stream with leaves floating by on top that stream in front of you, okay? This could be next to like a river, anything like that. Just visualize leaves just floating on by. Now, imagine placing unhelpful thoughts on those leaves and just watching them float on by, right? No need to engage with them or judge them or try to make sense of them. Just watch it float on by, okay? Now, if you're taking deep breaths while you're watching those thoughts just float away, okay, you're allowing yourself to create distance from those thoughts, okay? How does that distance feel? Anybody would like to share?
Feels like a release.
A release, good. So instead of that thought sticking to you, right? And now it's right here and you're just thinking and you're just focusing on it, right? Instead of that happening, you're like, you know what? We're just gonna let you float on by, okay? Just get on this lead, take several seats, go on, right? So that is one way to do it. And here's some really fun ones, okay? I would really appreciate y'all participating in this. So one thing we can do is change the impact of unhelpful thoughts. Remember, our thoughts are automatic, right? They just pop up. We can change how they impact us though, because of our really cool brain and imagination. So one thing is to detach from the thoughts, similar to leaves on a stream, right? But you can practice taking a step back and simply saying to yourself, I'm noticing that I'm having a fear of failing, right? Rather than just letting yourself think, I'm gonna fail, I'm gonna fail, I'm gonna fail. Just pause. I'm noticing right now that I'm having a thought that I'm failing. What does that do? Noticing it in that way and being intentional like that. Mhm. Good, good. So you're able to disrupt it, right? It also limits the impact that thought has on your emotions. Because if you're just letting that thought sit in the forefront and giving it the spotlight, right? And you're just focusing on it, it will impact you, okay? But if you practice detaching from it, and when you say, I'm noticing that I'm having this thought, you're noticing where it's at, then you can just let it go, breathe through it, right? Takes practice. These are not miracle things that will just work overnight, okay? Things to try out on your own. Slow it down like a record player. This has to be done out loud. Anybody know what a record player sounds like when it's on slow? I might be aging myself.
It's like super low.
It's,
Together.
yeah. So the words are like really long, right? Because it's like going too slow. So picture slowing down that thought. Okay, so give me an anxious thought about tests. I'm going to fail. How would you slow that down? Like a record being slowed down.
I'm going to fail.
Yes. What does that feel like doing that? I love Yeah. It's weird, huh? You're changing the impact it has on you emotionally. You're kind of transforming it, right? You can't take it as serious if you slow it down. Here's some other examples. Sing it. Sing the thought to a specific tune, like a country song. Look, my little cat meme I put right here, y'all. It's one of my favorites. I mean, yodel this thought, really identify the thought and just start singing it to a happy birthday tune, whatever you want to do, right? But again, you're transforming the impact it has on you when you do things like that. Anybody want to say a test anxious thought in a goofy voice for us? What was that, Dan? No? Okay, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. Okay, but you can see how that would make a difference if you're in a really anxious place while studying or during an exam. You can think to yourself, Lord, really changing your reaction to it. Another thing you can do is thank your mind, right? Remember, anxiety is data. It says this is important, right? So just acknowledging it and saying, thank you, mind, for letting me know how important this is to me. That's why I'm thinking about failure right now. Just thank you, right? Again, we're transforming reaction. We're transforming the impact, okay? This is my favorite. Okay, I learned this years ago. Name things like test anxiety, imposter syndrome, or perfectionism. Okay, this is especially important for my first gens. Represent, I'm first gen too. Talk back to it after you name it. Okay, give it its own like little personality, right? Mine is Big Bertha. Okay? Big Bertha used to be very strong, especially when I was an undergrad. Okay. Big Bertha would pop up during testing situations. One thing you can do is just say, nope, not right now, Big Bertha. Take a seat. Okay. We'll ruminate about it later. Okay. But I'm doing something right now. Okay. So practicing naming it again, you're transforming your reaction and the impact. Okay. Let's see where we're at on time, of course, because I talk so much. Next thing we want to talk about is improving emotional coping skills. Okay. So when those automatic anxious thoughts pop up, they will have an impact physically. You, however, can control or learn to control better how long that impact lasts, the intensity of that impact, right? We're all going to get flutters before important tests, okay? But what's the difference between flutters and full-blown panic attacks, right? Hyperventilating. Let's take some control, okay? Talking about ways to do that. So remember how I broke down emotions earlier into physical emotions, but also emotional feelings, reactions, right? I put this clip art bowl of gumbo here. I'm from Louisiana, okay? Picture all of the emotions that cause us discomfort that we don't like to feel. Like nobody's like, oh, I want to feel sad today, right? Picture that as the gumbo of life, okay? So meet these uncomfortable emotions with compassion, understanding, appreciation, and kindness. That takes work. That takes practice. Takes you noticing when you're feeling things like sadness, okay, anxiety, feeling insecure, discouraged, and just being compassionate to yourself. I want you to all imagine a world where we never felt sad, ever, no matter what. What would that look like? Creepy, good. I haven't heard that one yet. What else? Boring, why? Appreciate. What word is up here? Appreciation. Very good. We need things like sadness. We would not be who we are without sadness or ever feeling discouraged or insecure, right? Those are all data for us to let us know that things are important to us. What if we never grieved a loss, right? Could you imagine? We just date people and break up with them no matter what. I mean, some people do that, but that's a whole nother topic. So yeah, learning to appreciate these emotions when they come up, right? Like noticing them, giving them some kindness, like, wow, yeah, this is important to me, right? So that's the first part. Ooh, how I go back? Oh, Lord. Oh, I see. Okay. All right, let's talk about the physical symptoms. This is usually what people really don't like, okay? So one thing we can do is learn to better cope with the physical anxiety symptoms that might come up. So we have two different nervous systems that are responsible for our arousal, okay? And also like putting us to sleep, okay? So we have the sympathetic nervous system that happens whenever we're faced with something threatening, like a tiger running after us. Um, that's important, right? Getting our blood pumping, gets our heart rate up. We might get tense and ready to fight, right? There's a time and a place for that anxiety. Sitting down in a chair like this, taking a test. Do we need that kind of arousal? Do we need to get ready to fight and run? No, right? We're fighting ourselves at that point. Some people might actually fight, anyways, but so luckily we have a alternative nervous system that's responsible for calming us down when we're faced with that level of arousal, okay? And there's things you can do to better activate that nervous system. It's called the parasympathetic nervous system. You can just call it the calming system, okay? This is whenever we get anxious. Anybody ever had a panic attack, you might notice that you don't stay there too long at that high level. You usually come down somewhat because your body's like, no, we're not staying up there. That burns too many calories. We need to store fat and, evolutionarily. So yeah, your body naturally brings you down. Even if you try to make yourself stay super anxious, you're just gonna go to sleep eventually, okay? So let's talk about how to better activate this calming system. So think about what the activating system does, right? It increases your heart rate. What's something you can do always to lower your heart rate? Take deep breaths, right? What happens if you hold your breath while your heart's racing? Not good, right? Probably make it worse because now you're not getting the oxygen. So yeah, taking deep breaths, controlling your breathing, right? During exams while you're studying, that's important. You're getting that good oxygen to your brain so you can think more clearly. And also it's bringing that heart rate down if it gets activated too much, okay? There's things you can do with your breath. I threw on some other examples. For me, I get hot and flustered, right? I'm like, anybody got a fan, right? There's a reason why you crave that fan. It's because you want to cool yourself down, better activate that calming system. Drink some cold water if your mouth's dry, right? Like think about these things ahead of time. What do I need to cope with this anxiety if it happens during my exam? Okay, I'm gonna bring some cold water, cold pack, put it on the back of my neck. Let people stare at me. I don't care. Relaxing tense muscles. So remember that activating system is gonna tense you up, get you ready to run. You don't need to run. Let's stretch it out, okay? Relax those muscles. You can do that during an exam. I used to teach for a little while. I see students stretching and then take a deep sigh breath, right? Like there's a reason they're doing that, right? It's helping calm them. So just do that with more intention, okay? Also self-soothing. Okay, this might be a little weird. I'm not forcing anybody to do this, but give yourself a hug, right? Think about what that does when you're feeling shaky and tense. If you just ground yourself and just kind of, oh, nice squeeze, and you might even use some cognitive ways of encouraging yourself, right? Like, oh, I love you, body. Thank you for all this anxiety that I don't need right now. Let's just, you know? And applying gentle pressure if you're feeling shaky. Again, this all helps to calm you down. Okay. Where is my mouse? Okay. So let's talk about just some general pre and post-test strategies and routines you can establish to help yourself cope with test anxiety, but to also just increase success, okay? So I kind of broke this down on some things to think about doing weeks before the exam, the day before the exam, during the exam, and then after the exam, okay? Really creating a new habit, a healthy habit for yourself, and just breaking that cycle of test anxiety. So here's some things on here. I'm just going to go through a few of them briefly. A lot of times people are anxious about tests because they have a hard time studying. It's boring, right? Who wants to sit there and read through, I don't know, what's a boring subject? I don't want to apply that. Which is the worst subject you ever took? And you're just like, it's so boring to me. Don't say psychology. History? Yes. history. Some of it's interesting, but it's like, okay, can we get more pictures in the book? Anyways, so yeah, so thinking about ways to make things more exciting for you for studying, what can help you? So really engaging in this part of your brain to problem solve what is so difficult about studying and what makes you so anxious about it, right? Find some potential solutions. Look for study groups, study with a partner to maintain motivation. I see lots of students working at like Starbucks and stuff together. Love that, right? Think of rewarding yourself. That's a big one. If you're going to put all this energy into something, you don't want to just go home and go to sleep after, right? You just spent 7 hours studying for that chemistry exam or history, right? Reward yourself. That does something to the brain, right? If you get a reward when you engage in this really exhausting mental activity, it tells your brain like, oh, that was worth it, right? I got an ice cream after. We love ice cream, don't we? Okay. And then again, we're cucumbers with anxiety. It's the little cucumber here. We need sunlight, right? We need social care. We need to hang out with friends. Finding that balance, okay? Water yourself, food yourself healthily, okay? So just thinking about some of those things, do that weeks before the exam while you're studying. Night before the exam, sleep, okay? Your brain needs sleep. Don't procrastinate, okay? I think that was somewhere on there. Really get sleep. It's like the most important one. Eat healthy food. So think about your stomach being upset because of anxiety, right? What's going to make it worse or better food-wise? What upsets you?
We'll make it worse.
Mine's Buffalo Wild Wings. They don't have one here. But eating all that spicy food the night before, is that a good idea if you're already going to get a little nervous in the stomach? No, right? So think about, okay, what do I need to eat that will make me feel good during the exam tomorrow, right? I'm going to feel good with my body, right? And again, social support. If you're having some of that worry and it's hard disrupting it yourself, reach out to a friend and be like, hey, I'm worried about this test I have tomorrow. Do you have any advice, right? Like most friends will be like, you got this, right? They will help cheer you on. That feels good. Do that, okay? Again, this isn't rocket science. So if y'all are like, I already know, I'm mentioning it anyway. Day of the exam. So you're gonna get worried. Why? Because what? Because you care. Good. That's the biggest thing I want you to see. The anxiety here is just data, right? You're gonna have some of it. Avoid talking to nervous others though. Now remember, because you've done so hard the last few weeks, challenging, catastrophizing thinking, right? You don't want to go and talk to somebody who has not done that work while they were studying. They might have procrastinated, waited till the night before to panic study. Now they're half asleep, their heart's racing because they drank 3 monsters, not healthy, right? They're gonna make it worse for you if you're talking to them. So avoid those anxious others. Stay in your lane where you have been working towards this, okay? Don't forget to practice your coping skills we mentioned, and also utilize those encouraging phrases, right? We are with ourselves 24/7, okay? That's a good thing, sometimes a bad thing, right? Might get tired of ourselves, but listen, encourage yourself, be a cheerleader for yourself, okay? What would that friend say, right? Find that alternative thinking that helps you feel motivated and ready to take on this test, okay? Embrace a growth mindset, right? The whole point of learning is to be challenged, and then that is like reinforcing when you overcome it, right? We feel good about things like that. And you're not going to be perfect. You're going to get some things wrong, and that's just data that, okay, I need to study more on this, okay? Put things into perspective, and big one is plan a reward for yourself after the exam. Remember, we like rewards, okay? You're responsible for rewarding yourself. Some people early on in life, other people when you out of the house, okay? Like you have to reward yourself. What does that look like for you? Only you can figure that out, okay? Also make sure the reward is equivalent to the work you put in, okay? Maybe an ice cream won't be enough after a chemistry final exam. Maybe it's I need to go to the movies with a friend or something like that, right? During the exam, practice acceptance that here's the exam. This is where you're at, right? Embrace challenges, expect a few curveballs, okay? Engage in leaves on a stream, monitor your breathing. Don't forget those coping skills we talked about. clear your mind and return to the present moment of the exam. Put Big Bertha, tell her to have a seat, right? We don't need anxiety right now. Have a seat. Let me get back to what I was doing on this exam. And then you can utilize test taking tips and strategies for depending on the type of test, if it's like multiple choice. I'm not covering that, but I have some resources that you can access on campus to learn more about, feeling more confident with your test taking strategies. That can help with anxiety too, right? Then what is this? After the exam, again, engage in that rewarding activity. Meet rumination with reality and compassion after the exam. You might start ruminating on, oh, I could have done better on that question, could have done this better, right? Just meet yourself with compassion. Wow, this was really important to me. It's done though. What's done is done. I did it. What if I failed thoughts? Believe in your ability to overcome obstacles. There's likely been something that you've overcome before, right? Whether it's a test or something else in life, you have the resiliency and the ability to do that. And seeing it as an opportunity to problem solve, again, tell Big Bertha to take a nap, okay? So we're almost done here. One thing I want you to look into if you are struggling with test anxiety, learning how to study more efficiently, look into the Student Learning Assistance Center here on campus. Their website has some really good study skill stuff that I've highlighted on this slide. You can look up time management, note-taking, general study skills, memory, anxiety management's on there. Hello, right? Utilize that. And then also the Counseling Center, where I'm from, utilize us. We have self-help resources available on our website that are more specific to mental health, such as video webinars like this one that we're creating today. We also have Therapy Assistance Online, which is an app free to students, faculty, and staff. And this app is essentially like Google for mental health, okay? You can type in things like test anxiety, relationship problems, whatever it might be, and it will come up with helpful modules for you to better learn and understand these problems and also ways to manage and cope with them, okay? This is free, utilize that. Also, we offer individual and group counseling at the Counseling Center free of charge to students. So if for some reason, you've tried helping yourself and you're still struggling and you'd like a consultation with us, feel free to give us a call during semester, okay? Here's some references. Oh, that was a fancy little animation. Questions, comments? I know I went through those last pieces a little fast, but. Drop questions in the Q&A if you're virtual. Comments, right? Okay, see, I understood everything I said. Nice, good for me. Okay, last thing I need from everyone is to provide some feedback on this presentation. You can go to the link that's typed out there, or you can just use your phone and scan the screen or projector here. This QR code, let me move my head out the way. Let me know if you have any trouble with the QR code. Everyone's good? Got it? Okay, so go ahead, and this is information you'll need to complete the survey. Thank you all for coming here in person and virtual. I hope you found this helpful. And this video will be on our website at some point. So if you need to review it in the future, you will be able to, okay? Y'all take care.